7 months after the divorce, her millionaire ex-husband saw her pregnant and realized she never had the abortion. What he did next shocked everyone. Brandon Carter was in the middle of closing the biggest deal of his career when his phone buzzed with a notification that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. The conference room at Sterling Industries was packed with investors, lawyers, and executives. Brandon's construction empire was about to merge with a Fortune 500 company, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the state. 7 months of grueling negotiations had led to this moment. His phone sat face down on the mahogany table, but the notification sound made him glance at it instinctively. A Facebook memory notification. Something from a year ago. Brandon almost ignored it, but something made him flip the phone over during a brief break in presentations. The blood drained from his face. It was a photo from their last anniversary dinner. Him and Camille, smiling at an expensive restaurant, her hand resting over his. The caption read, "1 year ago today, celebrating 3 years of marriage with my beautiful wife. Looking forward to growing our family soon." But that wasn't what made his world stop spinning. It was the comment that had been added just 20 minutes ago. From Camille. "Well, I did grow our family. Just not with you. #blessedmama, #7 months strong." Brandon's hands started shaking. 7 months. Their divorce had been finalized exactly 7 months and 2 weeks ago. With trembling fingers, he clicked on Camille's profile. The profile he'd blocked and unblocked a dozen times but never had the courage to actually visit. The first photo made him drop his phone. Camille, glowing and radiant, her hands cradling a very pregnant belly. The caption read, 33 weeks and counting. Baby Carter arriving soon. Mama's ready to meet her miracle baby. Carter. She was still using his name. Mr. Carter? The room had gone quiet. 25 people were staring at him, waiting for his response to whatever question had been asked. Brandon looked around the room, at the contracts worth $200 million, at the investors who'd flown in from 3 different countries. "I need a moment." He stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back into the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. "Brandon, we need to finalize these terms today," his lawyer whispered urgently. But Brandon was already walking toward the door, his mind reeling with one devastating realization. She never had the abortion. The baby he'd told her they couldn't afford, the pregnancy that had ended their marriage, the choice that had torn them apart, she'd kept the baby. And she'd been carrying his child for 7 months without telling him. Brandon made it to his corner office before the panic attack hit. He sat behind his desk, staring at Camille's pregnancy photos, and remembered the night that had destroyed everything between them. 8 months ago, Camille had come home from her doctor's appointment with tears in her eyes and a piece of paper in her shaking hands. "Brandon," she'd whispered, "we need to talk." He'd been reviewing construction contracts, stressed about a project that was running over budget. The economy was shifting, and several of his competitors were underbidding him on major jobs. "Can it wait, baby? I've got 3 bids due tomorrow." "No, it can't wait." Something in her voice made him look up. Camille stood in their kitchen doorway wearing scrubs from her job at the children's hospital, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was holding what looked like an ultrasound photo. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. For one perfect moment, Brandon felt pure joy flood through him. The baby, the child they'd talked about, planned for, dreamed about during lazy Sunday mornings in bed. Then his eyes fell on the stack of bills next to his laptop. The notice from the bank about their line of credit. The project timeline that was hemorrhaging money every day it ran late. "How far along?" he asked. 8 weeks. "Brandon, I know the timing isn't ideal, but..." "Ideal?" Brandon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Camille, I might lose the business." The Morrison project is 3 weeks behind schedule and $50,000 over budget. I had to let go 2 guys last week. We'll figure it out. We always do. With what money? Do you know how much babies cost? Hospital bills, daycare, diapers, formula? Brandon was spiraling, the financial panic he'd been carrying for months finally erupting. We can barely afford our mortgage right now. Camille's face went pale. Are you saying you don't want this baby? I'm saying maybe we should think about whether this is the right time. The right time for what, Brandon? Say it. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Maybe we should consider other options, he finally said. Camille dropped the ultrasound photo. It fluttered to the kitchen floor, landing between them like a bridge that had just been burned. Other options, she repeated, her voice barely audible. I'm not saying we have to. I'm just saying maybe we should think about it. Get our finances stable first, wait a couple years. You want me to have an abortion. I want us to be practical. Get out. Camille. Get out, she screamed, and Brandon had never heard such pain in another human being's voice. Get out of this house. Get out of my sight. Get out of my life. Baby, let's just talk about this. I said get out. Brandon had left that night, checking into a hotel downtown. He'd expected Camille to cool off, to call him the next day so they could discuss things rationally. Instead, she'd filed for divorce. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but Brandon knew the truth. He'd asked the woman he loved to choose between their marriage and their unborn child. And she'd chosen the baby. Now, staring at photos of Camille's pregnant belly, Brandon realized the full magnitude of what he'd lost. Not just a wife, but a family. Not just a marriage, but a child who was about to be born without knowing their father. His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Carter? The Sterling team is asking when you'll be returning to the conference room. Brandon looked at the contracts on his desk, at the deal that would make him richer than he'd ever dreamed. Then he looked at the photo of Camille, radiant and pregnant with his child. Cancel the meeting, he said. Sir? Cancel everything. I need to find my wife. Brandon's first stop was the house they'd shared, the craftsman-style home in Maple Heights where they'd planned to raise their children. He still had a key, but when he pulled into the driveway, it was obvious Camille no longer lived there. The house was empty, with a for sale sign on the front lawn. His heart sank. She'd sold their home. The place where they'd been married in the backyard, where they'd painted the guest room yellow because Camille said it would make a perfect nursery someday. Brandon called his lawyer. Richard, I need you to find out where Camille is living. Brandon, you can't just. She's pregnant, Richard. 7 months pregnant with my child, and I had no idea. Jesus. Are you sure it's yours? The question hit Brandon like a slap. Of course it's mine. We were only divorced 7 months ago. The timeline? God, Richard, she was already pregnant when she filed the papers. It took Richard 3 hours to track down Camille's new address. She was living in a small apartment complex across town, the kind of place that catered to young families and single mothers. Sunset Gardens Apartments was a far cry from their spacious house in Maple Heights. Brandon sat in his BMW in the parking lot, staring up at Building C, Apartment 3B. His wife, his ex-wife, was living here, pregnant with his child, probably struggling financially while he closed million-dollar deals. Brandon climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and stood outside 3B for several minutes, trying to find the courage to knock. Finally, he raised his hand and rapped softly on the door. Footsteps. The pause. Then Camille's voice muffled through the door. Who is it? It's me. It's Brandon. Another pause, longer this time. Go away. Camille, please. I saw the photos. I know about the baby. I said go away. I just want to talk. Please. We have nothing to talk about. Brandon pressed his palm against the door, wishing he could touch her, hold her, apologize for every stupid thing he'd said that night 8 months ago. Is it mine? He asked quietly. The silence stretched so long he thought she might not answer. Yes, she finally said, her voice thick with tears. She's yours. They were having a daughter. Camille, let me in. Please. I need to explain. Explain what? How you told me to get rid of our baby. How you chose money over our family. How you walked out on me when I needed you most. Each word was like a knife to his chest, but he deserved every cut. I was wrong, he said. I was scared and stupid and wrong about everything. It's too late for apologies, Brandon. Please. Just let me see you. Let me see. He paused, the words catching in his throat. Let me see our daughter. She's not born yet. Then let me see you. Let me see that you're okay. Brandon heard movement inside the apartment, then the sound of locks being turned. The door opened just wide enough for him to see Camille's face. 7 months of pregnancy had made her more beautiful than ever. Her dark hair was longer now, cascading over her shoulders. Her face was fuller, glowing with that radiance pregnant women were supposed to have. But her eyes held a sadness that made his chest ache. You look. He started, then stopped. How did you tell your ex-wife she was beautiful when you were the reason she was raising your child alone? Tired, Camille finished. I look tired. Because I am. Can I come in? Just for a minute. Camille hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door wider. Brandon walked into the small apartment and immediately understood why she looked so exhausted. The living room was set up as a workspace. A computer, stacks of papers, accounting ledgers spread across a folding table. Are you working from home? He asked. I'm working 3 jobs from home, Camille said, closing the door behind him. Medical billing, freelance bookkeeping, and online tutoring. The hospital let me go when I hit 6 months. Too much liability, they said. Brandon felt sick. 3 jobs? Camille, you should be resting. I should be doing a lot of things. But when you're a single mother with no savings and medical bills piling up, rest isn't really an option. The guilt hit him like a physical blow. While he was negotiating million-dollar deals, Camille was working 3 jobs to support herself and their unborn child. How much? He asked. How much what? How much do you owe? Medical bills, rent, everything. I'll pay it. Camille's eyes flashed with anger. I don't want your money. It's not charity, Camille. It's my responsibility. That's my daughter you're carrying. You lost the right to call her your daughter when you told me to get rid of her. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. I never said that exactly. You said we should consider other options. When a woman is pregnant and her husband says, other options, there's only one thing that means. Brandon sank into the small couch, his head in his hands. I was scared. We were both scared, Brandon. But I didn't run away. I know, and I've regretted it every single day for 7 months. Camille moved carefully to the chair across from him, one hand automatically going to her belly. Brandon watched the gesture and felt his heart break a little more. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. About the pregnancy, about keeping the baby? Because you made it clear you didn't want to know. That's not true. Isn't it? You told me to think about other options and then you left. You moved out that same night. What was I supposed to think? Brandon remembered that night, how he'd sat in the hotel room waiting for Camille to call. He'd expected her to reach out, to want to work things through together. I thought you'd call, he said quietly. I thought you'd come home. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in the memory of that night when everything had gone wrong. I filed for divorce because I couldn't stay married to someone who didn't want our child, Camille said finally. But Brandon, I need you to understand something. This baby, she might be the only child I ever have. What do you mean? Camille's eyes filled with tears. I have endometriosis. Severe endometriosis. The doctors told me years ago that getting pregnant would be difficult, and staying pregnant would be even harder. Brandon's world tilted. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't want you to marry me out of pity. I didn't want you to feel obligated to have children with me just because I might not be able to have them with anyone else. Camille, when I found out I was pregnant, it was a miracle. The doctors said I had maybe a 5% chance of conceiving naturally. Tears were streaming down her face now. And then you told me to get rid of her. Brandon felt like he was drowning. All this time, he'd thought Camille was being stubborn or emotional about the pregnancy. He'd never known that their daughter might be the only child she could ever have. I'm so sorry, he whispered. God, Camille, I'm so sorry. If I had known. You shouldn't have needed to know. You should have wanted our baby regardless. She was right. Completely, devastatingly right. Can I? Brandon's voice cracked. Can I feel her move? Camille looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Brandon moved to kneel beside her chair. With shaking hands, he placed his palms on her belly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he felt it, a strong, unmistakable kick against his hand. Oh my God, he breathed. She's been very active today, Camille said softly. I think she knows Daddy's here. Daddy. The word hit him like a lightning bolt. I want to be her daddy, Brandon said, looking up at Camille. I want to be there when she's born. I want to change diapers and walk the floor with her when she's crying. I want to teach her to ride a bike and scare away boys when she's 16. Brandon, I want to marry you again. I want to be a family. Camille closed her eyes. It's too late. No, it's not. It's never too late for love. Love? Camille's eyes snapped open. You think this is about love? This is about trust, Brandon. This is about knowing that when life gets hard, when money gets tight, when things don't go according to plan, you won't just walk away again. I won't. How do I know that? How do I know that when our daughter is colicky and crying all night, you won't decide fatherhood is too hard? How do I know that when she needs expensive medical care or special schooling, you won't start talking about other options again? Brandon didn't have an answer. Words were meaningless now. Only actions would matter. Let me prove it to you, he said finally. How? I don't know yet. But let me try. Let me be there for the rest of your pregnancy. Let me come to doctor appointments. Let me help you get ready for the baby. Camille was quiet for a long time, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. One chance, she said finally. You get one chance to prove you've changed. But Brandon, if you hurt me again, if you walk away from our daughter, there won't be a third chance. I understand. And we're not getting back together. This is about co-parenting, not romance. Brandon's heart ached, but he nodded. Whatever you need. As he prepared to leave, Brandon turned back to Camille. What's her name? He asked. Our daughter. Have you picked a name? Camille smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Grace. Her name is Grace Catherine Carter. It was perfect. I love it, Brandon said. I love her. And Camille? I love you too. Camille didn't respond, but she didn't tell him not to say it again. It was a start. The next 2 months passed in a blur of doctor appointments, baby shopping, and tentative conversations. Brandon threw himself into proving he'd changed with the same intensity he'd once brought to business deals. He attended every prenatal appointment, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. He assembled the crib in Camille's nursery, painted the walls a soft lavender, and installed blackout curtains for better sleep. Most importantly, he convinced Camille to quit her 3 jobs and let him support her financially. It wasn't charity, he insisted. It was an investment in their daughter's health. The doctor said stress isn't good for the baby, he'd argued. Let me handle the bills so you can focus on staying healthy. Slowly, Camille's walls began to crumble. She started texting him updates about her day, sharing funny stories about how Grace was moving around. She let him feel the baby kick, and even allowed him to talk to his daughter through her belly. "Grace, this is Daddy," he'd whisper during their evening visits. "I can't wait to meet you, sweetheart. I'm going to love you so much." But just as things were improving between them, crisis struck. Brandon was in a construction meeting when his phone rang. Camille's name on the screen made him immediately excuse himself. "Brandon," her voice was tight with pain. "Something's wrong." "What's happening?" "I'm bleeding. And the contractions, they're different this time. Stronger." Brandon was already running to his truck. "I'm on my way. Are you calling the doctor?" She said to go to the hospital immediately. "Don't drive yourself. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Brandon made it to Camille's apartment in 7 minutes, breaking several traffic laws in the process. He found her sitting on her couch, breathing through contractions and looking scared. "How bad is the pain?" he asked, helping her to her feet. "Bad. Really bad. And Brandon, it's too early. I'm only 35 weeks. They made it to Mercy General in record time, with Brandon holding Camille's hand as she breathed through increasingly intense contractions. In the labor and delivery room, Dr. Sarah Martinez examined Camille with growing concern. "You're dilated to 4 centimeters, she announced. "And the baby's heart rate is elevated. We're looking at preterm labor." "Is she going to be okay?" Brandon asked, his voice tight with fear. "Babies born at 35 weeks usually do very well, but we're going to do everything we can to slow down labor and give her a few more weeks." The next 12 hours were the longest of Brandon's life. He watched Camille fight through contractions while doctors worked to stop her labor with medications and bed rest. "I'm scared," Camille whispered during a brief lull in the contractions. "She's going to be fine," Brandon said, though he was terrified himself. "Grace is strong, just like her mama. What if she's not ready? What if something's wrong?" Brandon took Camille's hand in both of his. "Then we'll handle it. Together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Around midnight, the contractions finally began to slow down. Dr. Martinez was cautiously optimistic. "We've managed to stop active labor," she said. "But Camille, you're on strict bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. No work, no stress, lots of rest." "For how long?" Camille asked. "Until Grace decides she's ready to meet the world." Over the next 3 weeks, Brandon basically moved into Camille's apartment. He worked remotely, managing his business from her kitchen table while keeping an eye on her and their unborn daughter. He cooked her meals, helped her to the bathroom when walking became difficult, and rubbed her feet when they swelled. In the evenings, they'd sit together on the couch, his hands on her belly, talking to Grace and marveling at her movements. "She's going to be a dancer," Camille said one evening as Grace performed what felt like an entire ballet routine inside her womb. "Or a soccer player," Brandon countered, laughing as a particularly strong kick nearly knocked his hand off Camille's belly. It was during these quiet moments that Brandon began to hope they might find their way back to each other. The way Camille leaned into his touch, the way she smiled when he talked to the baby, the way she didn't pull away when he brushed a strand of hair from her face. But he didn't push. He'd learned his lesson about rushing things, about making demands before he'd earned the right to make them. Then, at exactly 38 weeks, Grace decided she was ready. Camille woke Brandon at 4 a.m., her hand shaking his shoulder gently. "It's time," she said simply. Brandon was instantly alert. Are you sure? I'm sure. These contractions are different, stronger, and they're 5 minutes apart. By the time they reached the hospital, Camille was in active labor. Dr. Martinez confirmed that Grace was finally ready to make her entrance into the world. Looks like we're having a baby today, she announced with a smile. The next 8 hours tested every ounce of strength and endurance both Brandon and Camille possessed. Brandon coached her through contractions, reminded her to breathe, and provided whatever comfort he could. You're amazing, he told her during a brief rest between contractions. You're the strongest person I've ever known. I don't feel strong, Camille panted. I feel like I'm being run over by a truck. The strongest people are the ones who keep going when they don't feel strong. At 12:47 p.m. on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, Grace Catherine Carter entered the world weighing 6 pounds, 8 ounces, and announcing her arrival with a robust cry that filled the delivery room. Dr. Martinez placed their daughter on Camille's chest, and Brandon felt his entire world reorganize itself around this tiny, perfect person. Oh my God, Camille whispered, tears streaming down her face. Look at her, Brandon. Look at what we made. Grace was beautiful beyond words. She had Camille's delicate features and Brandon's dark eyes. She had a head full of soft brown hair and the tiniest fingernails he'd ever seen. She's perfect, Brandon said, his voice thick with emotion. Absolutely perfect. Would you like to cut the cord, Dad? Dr. Martinez asked. The words sent a jolt of pure joy through Brandon's chest. With shaking hands, he made the cut that officially made Grace an independent little person in the world. Hi, Grace, he whispered, gently touching her tiny hand. I'm your daddy. I love you so much already. As if she recognized his voice, Grace turned her head toward him, her dark eyes seeming to focus on his face. I think she knows you, Camille said softly. Over the next few hours, as nurses checked Grace's vital signs and completed newborn assessments, Brandon marveled at every detail of his daughter. Her tiny fingers that wrapped around his thumb. The way she rooted for food when she was hungry. The soft sounds she made when she slept. That evening, as visiting hours wound down and the hospital settled into quiet routine, Brandon sat in the chair next to Camille's bed, holding Grace while she slept. She's really here, Camille said softly. She's really here, Brandon agreed. I can't believe we're parents. Best job I've ever had, Brandon said, gently stroking Grace's cheek. Camille watched them together, and Brandon saw something in her expression that made his heart race with possibility. Camille, he said carefully, I know we agreed this was about co-parenting, but I want more than that. Brandon, I want to marry you again. I want to wake up every morning knowing we're in this together. I want to be Grace's father and your husband. Camille was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between Brandon and their sleeping daughter. You hurt me so badly, she said finally. I know. You made me feel like Grace was a burden instead of a blessing. I was wrong. So completely wrong. If I give you another chance, if I let you back into my heart completely, I need to know you'll stay. No matter what challenges come up, no matter how hard parenthood gets, no matter what life throws at us. Brandon stood up carefully, still holding Grace, and moved to kneel beside Camille's hospital bed. Camille Washington Carter, he said softly, I love you more than I ever thought possible. I love you for your strength, your kindness, and the way you chose our daughter even when I was too scared to choose both of you. Will you marry me again? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you and Grace? Camille looked at him for a long moment, then reached out to touch Grace's tiny hand. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you again. Brandon leaned forward and kissed her gently, sealing the promise with their sleeping daughter between them. I love you, he said. I love you too. Both of you. The community center was decorated with white roses and baby's breath, just like their first wedding. But this time, as Brandon and Camille renewed their vows, they had a special guest. 2-year-old Grace Carter sat in the front row, wearing a tiny lavender dress and clapping enthusiastically every time anyone said, "Mama" or "Daddy." "Do you, Brandon, take Camille to be your wife again, promising to love her through good times and challenging times, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Brandon said, his eyes never leaving Camille's face. "Forever and always." "Do you, Camille, take Brandon to be your husband again, promising to love him through good times and challenging times, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Camille said, tears of joy streaming down her face. When they kissed to seal their remarriage, Grace squealed with delight and toddled toward them on unsteady legs. "Mama, Daddy," she called, wrapping her tiny arms around both their legs. Brandon picked up his daughter and spun her around, making her giggle with pure joy. "We're a family, Grace," he said. "Forever and always." "Family," Grace repeated, clapping her hands. As they danced to their wedding song with Grace between them, Brandon reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the devastating mistake that had nearly cost him everything, to the moment in that hospital room when Grace had changed their lives forever. Some stories end with happily ever after, but Brandon knew their story was just beginning. Every day brought new opportunities to choose love over fear, trust over doubt, and family over everything else. The name Grace had been perfect. She truly had been God's grace in their lives, bringing them back together when everything seemed lost. And as he looked at his wife and daughter, both laughing as Grace tried to dance by spinning in circles, Brandon made a silent promise. He would never again let fear make his choices. He would never again walk away from the people he loved. And he would spend every day of the rest of his life being worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Because sometimes, if you're very lucky and very determined to change, love really can conquer everything. Even the biggest mistakes. Even the deepest hurt. Even the fear that you've lost your chance at happiness forever. Grace Catherine Carter was living proof that miracles happen when you choose love over fear. And Brandon Carter would never forget that lesson again. The end. Have you ever made a mistake so big you thought it couldn't be forgiven? Sometimes the greatest love stories are about second chances and the courage to change. Share your thoughts about Brandon's journey and whether everyone deserves a second chance at love.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.